What's up, folks? Just an FYI before we get into the video, this is a re-upload of a recent video that I uploaded the other day. I went through all the FAQs and I fortunately got a couple rules wrong, so I'm going to go ahead and re-record those sections and repost this video so there's no confusion with the rules whatsoever. Let's get into it. So over the course of the last 48 hours or so, Games Workshop has released an absolute battery of FAQs to address some issues with the Warhammer 40k 9th edition rule set and address some balance problems that it was having. And it's kind of a confusing mess right now. So let's take the opportunity to go over the FAQs that were just released, specifically the FAQs released on August 12th of 2020 and earlier this week, and try to parse through exactly what the designers are doing with these rules changes. What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be looking at some of the FAQs that released this week for Warhammer 40k 9th edition. Obviously, we have here some designer's notes for an update on August 12th, the day that I'm recording this video, to the Lookout Sir rules. Now, Lookout Sir was actually altered earlier this week, and this is going to be the second iteration of this rule that we'll be playing through within the last, I think, 48 hours. Lookout Sir earlier this week, to my knowledge, had been changed so that vehicles with less than 10 wounds were just totally ignored for the purposes of the rule. Not only did they not contribute Lookout Sir to a character, but they also weren't considered to be the closest if they were standing next to you. This was because some issues arose from Lookout Sir where if you had character, monsters, or vehicles, even if they had less than 10 wounds, they could potentially be triggering Lookout Sir on other units, and Games Workshop decided to just nip that in the bud and get rid of it entirely. The downside is that they then removed the ability to block for characters for all these vehicles that are below 10 wounds. So endless memes are coming out about Carnifexes, sort of not blocking for tiny Tyranid characters and things like that. But that has been addressed in this more recent FAQ on August 12th. Although the way the FAQ is laid out is a little confusing, so let's go over it real quick. The first bullet point here is specifically to cover character, monsters, or vehicles that are above 10 wounds. So these big things like Hive Tyrants or Demon Primarchs, those guys will block for characters and contribute Lookout Sir. Additionally, if you're a non-character vehicle, for example, those Dreadnoughts and those other small vehicles that we just talked about, those will always contribute Lookout Sir and block for you as well. However, if you are a character vehicle who is below those 10 wounds, you won't be covered by this bullet point. Lastly, if you're a unit with 3 or more models, then you're good to go, just as normal. We also had some additional core book erratas. Here's the Lookout Sir change, obviously, that we just discussed, that have been brought up in this latest bevy of FAQs. The biggest one, and this is such a big bombshell, and it is annoying to me anyway that this sort of bombshell ruling has been attached to the end of a designer's note in a parentheses, but we'll go ahead and talk about it. Basically, this is going to be a clarification of the obscuring and dense cover rules. For some reason, GW can't just sort of word these in a realistic way that they want, the way they want people to play them. And I do kind of appreciate that the designer's notes are in here to help instruct people how to decipher the rules. That said, I don't know, these are it's a lot of rules here, basically. So this the first part of this obscuring and dense cover clarification states that even if you are normally ignore dense cover for whatever reason, either you're on top of it or you're shooting at you're trying to draw a line of sight to a Titan or something like that, you still do have to physically be able to draw a line of sight to that unit. Everyone knew that was how this worked. I guess some people just had some questions where you could touch the inside of a Nova L and then magically see through it. That's not how it worked. If it's a Nova L, it's still 2 feet of concrete in your face, so you won't be able to see through that. The big change here, though, is that they've clarified the dense cover terrain, and dense cover has been an absolute mess of a rule so far. It's called dense cover, but it doesn't actually contribute cover in the way that other types of terrain do. For example, light cover and heavy cover both specify that units benefiting from them receive the benefit of cover in certain circumstances. For example, heavy cover giving cover when you are in melee, and light cover giving cover when you're being shot by a gun. Dense cover doesn't do that. And that's specified, or that's sort of clarified here, that dense cover doesn't require you to be benefiting from cover to get -1 to be hit thanks to dense cover. Great, perfect. That's how the rules were written initially. Perfect. However, there's a parentheses down here that says, note that any rule that ignores the benefits of cover or benefits that impose a penalty on hit rolls still ignore the penalty of dense cover. This is not how the rules work. Rules as written in the rulebook. Because dense cover doesn't actually apply the benefit of cover to anything at all. This is a totally new interpretation that they're adding in here. This would have, I think, needed to be added in an errata, but they've added it in a designer's note, so that's where we're at. Obviously, I'm kind of psyched about this because like a lot of the armies I play have a lot of cover ignoring stuff, so that's going to be sick. And maybe if dense cover in the center of the table becomes more prevalent, we might see a return of things like Imperial Fists to get around that -1 to be hit. I do think this is potentially a big shift in the terrain construction meta and how dense cover is set up on tables because it now is ignorable. But it is kind of weird that it's kind of a ninja errata, to be honest. But not altogether unheard of. I think it makes a lot of sense that if you ignore cover, you would ignore dense cover. I just wish that they had sort of baked it into the rules initially.
And one last thing to that point, I went back and looked at a lot of the cover ignoring rules in the game, and a lot of them specified that they specifically ignore bonuses to their target's armor save as a result of cover, which means it is questionable whether or not they would ignore dense cover. Rules as written, they would not, although given that this is sort of a brand new interpretation of how dense cover is meant to work mechanically in the game, I think that could be the case for another errata shortly, that we may see that change. So currently a lot of the... Double check what what your cover ignoring rule says it does, because it may not ignore dense cover, in fact, even after this errata. But yeah, who knows? We might see that be altered.
There's a couple other clarifications in here. Apparently, there are weapons in the game that prevent models from ignoring wounds, and there's clarification on how that actually works. I'm not aware of what weapons those are, but that might be design space that Games Workshop is going to be pursuing in the future. We also have a clarification on moving through models. So this is basically specifies that if you have something like Fly, you can move within engagement range of other models, but you just can't end in them. There's a clarification here for moving through models. Nothing really changes here. I think this is mostly just to edify people on exactly how moving through models works in the rules, so that's fine. No rules have really been rewritten in this instance. Now, getting into the faction-specific FAQs that were added, there was some big change or a big update to the Grey Knight and Thousand Sons FAQs, and I think this is like such shade on the part of the designers, to be honest. When you go in, you go to Warhammer Community, you're like, oh, sweet, new Thousand Sons and Grey Knights rules. Let's see what's in here. And it's just a designer's note telling you that your ability to ignore the increased warp charge on smites will not be returning in 9th edition, so stop complaining and get over it. In fairness, it is really nice that we have clarification from the game designers on this in print, and there can be no argument about it. Grey Knights and Thousand Sons now do not ignore the increased warp charge on smites. Full stop, period, end of story. We're done talking about it. There's no more debate. And you don't have to sort of hold your breath and hope for an errata that changes that. It's not going to happen. So I don't hate that that's included. It's just... It's kind of, I imagine, a little feel badsies for the Grey Knight and Thousand Sons players to come in and just basically receive what is sort of a nerf in a designer's note on their errata. But it is important to note that has been clarified now. So I don't know. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Now I will talk about the Grand Tournament mission pack quickly. This wasn't really updated on August 12th. Because this is basically all of the same stuff that happened in the core rulebook update. It's sort of annoying they have to update both books to do that. Maybe just use one or the other, I don't know. But sure, there it is. All of these changes that were made into the core rulebook are now in the Grand Tournament book. There is a clarification in here from Psychic Ritual, which is very important to note. Psychic Ritual must be completed by the same model. That was a little ambiguous, the way the rules were worded, and alongside a lot of the other secondary objectives, allowing you to complete them over multiple models. It was a question of whether or not this was intended, and now we have a clarification. Boom. Psychic Ritual, you have to do it with the same model 3 times. So if your opponent starts completing a Psychic Ritual and you kill that model, they are probably shit out of luck. The other big change that came down this week, this was earlier this week, prior to this August 12th version of the errata, is the change to Smite. It's been clarified that you cannot attempt to manifest Smite more than once per during the same battle round with each Psyker. Boom, done. That is a big shift in a lot of lists that I think were poised to sort of take over the metagame using specifically Magnus the Rad, but I was kind of excited to use Zone Throws to smite multiple times. But obviously those it was questionable whether that was the intention from the get-go. It sounded like, based on some of the bullet points in the book, that it might not have been, and it was a big debate. But it's been clarified now. So that is a big change that happened earlier this week, just a couple days ago, that will be removing a couple list archetypes from the game, really trying to spam smites. Now, another big change that came out of that same errata was an update to the way that CP is gained or refunded from stratagems. Previously, there was a hard cap on a regen cap on 1 CP per battle round from anything that gained or refunded CP, not including the Battleforge bonus that you get at the start of your command phase. And but the downside is that there were a lot of stratagems in the game. For example, a big one, it was Agents of Vect, which was supposed to refund you the cost of any stratagem that it blocked, and instead just gave you 1. So, but that has been updated to specify that stratagems specifically can ignore the cap of once per round. So that makes a lot of stratagems more viable. Feeder tendrils is called out in the errata, which was one that was worrisome to me specifically. Obviously, there are other examples as well. For example, the assassin stratagem to regenerate CP when they kill units, the Space Wolf stratagem that basically does the same thing, and like I said, that Agents of Vect as well. Lots of instances of stratagems that will now be more viable because they actually work as intended. Now, there is a weird loophole here, and that is a sort of non-stratagem or abilities that refund multiple CP. Clearly, there are a couple in the game. The best example I can think of is Player of the Twilight out of the Harlequin's Codex. It's a warlord trait that refunds the total CP spent on a stratagem, and unfortunately, as far as I know, that's going to continue to refund 1 CP every time it triggers, instead of refunding the entire cost of the stratagem. So pretty unfortunate. That's going to need another errata. I think there are a couple other examples of non-stratagem CP regen that would normally regen multiple CP, but are still broken and still refund a single CP every time they work. Unless there's a rules addendum that I'm missing, although I don't believe that there is. I think it still requires additional clarification on how that rule is actually supposed to work. It is good that now many strategies in the game have become playable once more. And one more minor change coming out of this same errata. Heavy cover was changed so that it only benefits units that did not charge that turn. Whereas the previous wording allowed you to ignore it if you charged that turn, now it's been altered so that if you are in heavy cover and are charged by an enemy unit, then you become harder to kill. Honestly, not a lot of heavy cover being seen on tables right now. Hopefully that changes a little bit. I do think it's an interesting mechanic, and as things shape up and I think cover becomes a little bit more important, or melee becomes a little bit more important as we kind of get a bead on where the format is going to be looking, I think it's going to be interesting for TOs to put more heavy cover on the table and make that dynamic a little bit more interesting. So I do like that it's a little bit more useful now. Now, actually taking cover in heavy cover gives you a pretty decent benefit. So the other big, huge change that we have that's going to be really impactful for the metagame of 40k going into the future is the errata to Saga of the Beast. Which did get an errata, I think, last week, which altered a couple of its things. In this one, it there's a really important clarification, which is that the Repulsor Executioner can now be equipped with an Icarus rocket. But I know it's the one where Space Wolves lose OBSEC on their entire army. That's the that's the important clarification. Yeah. So previously in Saga of the Beast, the Defenders of Humanity ability, which is the ability that gives any Space Wolves unit OBSEC, was given to the entire army, and after the FAQ was released last week that did not address that at all, it was sort of assumed that that was the intention and that Space Wolves kind of now had the ability to OBSEC. Honestly, kind of cool for Space Wolves. I wish they had gotten it was like a little bit more targeted. If you target like elites choices and characters with it, that's like a really cool place for Space Wolves to be. For like Ragnar Blackmane to be objective secured is just really kind of fluffy for Space Wolves. And it felt kind of weird because it seemed like it had been intentional, but on the flip side, it might not have been because there are two Defenders of Humanity abilities in the game, which are both different, and that's just annoying. But we have clarified here in this errata on August 12th that only troops in Space Wolves detachments gain that ability. So only Space Wolves troops are OBSEC now. It was potentially going to be a big issue when they started bringing vehicles onto the table. Things like Landspeeder Tempests and Impulsors being objective secured was very powerful and was just sort of cementing Space Wolves' place probably around the top of the meta. With that being changed, Space Wolves kind of settle back to, I think, mid-tier in terms of the Space Marine armies. They do have some pretty powerful abilities, but they don't have access to all the cool Space Marine stuff yet. So that between that and this might change, two big changes that are going to remove a couple different list archetypes out of the game, and I think are important to talk about while we're covering all these FAQs. So that's going to be it for these FAQs that we're going to cover for today. A couple relatively large changes in here, especially in terms of balance for Space Wolves and the Smite faction specifically, but overall, I don't think not particularly game breaking. It is going to be interesting to see the impact of that dense cover ruling rolling forward. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's still a very mutable and interesting position for the meta to be in. I do think that there is the potential for a lot of big swings in the not too distant future, and especially with a new Space Marine Codex around the table, that may just change all of these Space Marine units that we're really worried about, and Space Marine subfactions that we're sort of concerned about. It's going to be a very fluid time for 40k, and we'll see if GW continues this rapid pace of FAQs as new issues are addressed by the community. It could also be kind of a period of instability for the metagame. A lot of these lists may come and go very rapidly, and especially on Tabletop Simulator, where the meta is able to shift instantaneously to new builds. It's kind of gonna be a Wild West for a couple weeks, and we'll just see how it goes. So thanks everybody for watching. Remember to check me out on Patreon, patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, where you can get all sorts of cool stuff like early access to videos and stuff like that. I hope everyone's enjoying 9th edition so far, and despite the fact that the rules are sort of constantly changing, are hopefully getting to a point where they're happy with their lists and ready to really grind some games once we know what the actual final product of the game is going to look like. But all in all, remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming. Take it easy.